Chapter 11. The Lieutenant. I was walking with the guard, behind a little to the right of her, so my feet would not touch the sacrament mat, down a corridor I had never seen before. A turn to the right, a few steps down and right again. What an endless labyrinth this prison was. At last we stepped out into a small interior courtyard. A drizzle of rain was falling. It was a chill raw morning in late May. After 3 months in prison, I had been called for my first hearing. Board windows stared from tall buildings on 3 sides of the courtyard. Along the fourth was a high wall, and against this stood a row of small huts. So these were where the infamous interrogations took place. My breath came short and hard as I thought back to the reports I had passed on the night of Hitler's birthday. Lord Jesus, you were called to a hearing too. Show me what to do. And then I saw something. Whoever used a fourth of the huts had planted a row of tulips along the side. They were wilted now, only tall stems and yellowing leaves, but, dear Lord, let me go to hut number 4. The guard had paused to unstrap a long military cape fastened to the shoulder of her uniform. Protected from the rain, she crunched up the gravel path, past the first hut, the second and the third. She halted in front of the hut with the flower bed and rapped on the door. "Come in," called a man's voice. The guard pushed open the door, gave a straight-arm salute and marched smartly off. The man wore a gun in a leather holster and a Berry-Bonds uniform. He removed his hat and I was staring into the face of the gentle-mannered man who had visited me in my cell. "I am Lieutenant Ralmes," he said, stepping to the door to close it behind me. "You're shivering. Here, let me get a fire going." He filled a pot-bellied stove from a small coal scuttle, for all the world a kindly German householder entertaining a guest. What if this was all a subtle trap, this kind, human manner? Perhaps he had simply found it more effective than brutality into tricking the truth from affection-starved people. Oh Lord, let no weak gullibility on my part endanger another's life. "I hope," the officer was saying, "we won't have any more days this spring as cold as this one." He drew out a chair for me to sit on. Warily I accepted it. How strange after 3 months to feel a chair back behind me, chair arms for my hands. The heat from the stove was quickly warming the little room. In spite of myself, I began to relax. I ventured a timid comment about the tulips. So tall, they must have been beautiful. Oh, they were. He seemed ridiculously pleased. The best I've ever grown. At home, we always have Dutch bulbs. We talked about flowers for a while, and then he said, "I would like to help you, Miss ten Boom, but you must tell me everything. I may be able to do something, but only if you do not hide anything from me." So there it was already, all the friendliness, the kindly concern that I'd half believed is all a device to elicit information. Well, why not? This man was a professional with a job to do, but I too, in a small way, was a professional. For an hour he questioned me, using every psychological trick that the young men of our group had drilled me in. In fact, I felt like a student who had crammed for a difficult exam and then is tested on only the most elementary material. It soon became clear that they believed the base had been a headquarters for raids on food ration officers around the country. Of all the illegal activities I had on my conscience, this was probably the one of the least. Other than receiving the stolen cards each month and passing them on, I knew no details of the operation. Apparently my real ignorance began to show. After a while, Lieutenant Ralmes stopped making notes of my hopelessly stupid answers. "Your other activities, Miss ten Boom, what would you like to tell me about them?" "Other activities? Oh, you mean you want to know about my church for mentally retarded people?" And I plunged into an eager account of my efforts at preaching to the feeble-minded. The lieutenant's eyebrows rose higher and higher. "What a waste of time and energy," he exploded at last. "If you want converts, surely one normal person is worth all the half-wits in the world." I stared into the man's intelligent blue-grey eyes. True National Socialist philosophy, I thought, tulip bed or no. And then to my astonishment I heard my own voice saying boldly, "May I tell you the truth, Lieutenant Ralmes? This hearing, Miss Ten Boom, is predicated on the assumption that you will do me that honour. The truth, sir, I said, swallowing, is that God's viewpoint is sometimes different from ours. So different that we could not even guess at it unless he had given us a book which tells us such things. I knew it was madness to talk to this way to a Nazi officer, but he said nothing, so I plunged ahead. In the Bible, I learned that God values us not for our strength or our brains, but simply because he has made us. Who knows, in his eyes, a half-wit may be worth more than a watchmaker or a lieutenant. Lieutenant Ralm stood up abruptly. That will be all for today. He walked swiftly through the door. Guard! I heard footsteps on the gravel path. The prisoner will return to her cell. Following the guard through the long cold corridors, I knew I had made a mistake. I had said too much. I had ruined whatever chance I had that this man might take an interest in my case. And yet the following morning it was Lieutenant Ralms himself who unlocked my cell door and escorted me to the hearing. Apparently he did not know of the regulation that forbade prisoners to step on the mat, for he indicated that I was to walk ahead of him down the centre of the hall. I avoided the eyes of the guards along the route, guilty as a well-trained dog discovered on the living room sofa. In the courtyard this time a bright sun was shining. Today, he said, we will stay outside. You are pale. You are not getting enough sun. Gratefully, I followed him to the farthest corner of the little yard where the air was still and warm. We settled our backs against a wall. I could not sleep last night, the lieutenant said, thinking about that book where you have read such different ideas. What else does it say in there? On my closed eyelids the sun glimmered and blazed. It says, I began slowly, that a light has come into this world so that we need no longer walk in the dark. Is there darkness in your life, Lieutenant? There was a very long silence. There is great darkness, he said at last. I cannot bear the work I do here. Then all at once he was telling me about his wife and children in Bremen, about their garden, their dogs, their summer hiking vacations. Bremen was bombed last week. Each morning I asked myself, are they still alive? There is one who has them always in his sight, Lieutenant Ralms. Jesus is the light the Bible shows to me, the light that can shine even in such darkness as yours. The man pulled the visor of his hat lower over his eyes. The skull and crossbones glinted in the sunlight. When he spoke, it was so low I could hardly hear. What can you know of darkness like mine? 2 more mornings the hearings continued. He had dropped all pretence of questioning me on my underground activities and seemed especially to enjoy hearing about my childhood. Mama, father, the aunts. He wanted to hear stories about them again and again. He was incensed to hear that father had died here in Schwenningen. The documents on my case made no mention of it. These documents did answer one question, the reason for solitary confinement. Prisoner's condition contagious to others in cell. I stared at the brief typed words where Lieutenant Ralms' finger rested. I thought of the long, wind-haunted nights, the scowling guards, the rule of silence. But if it wasn't punishment, why were they so angry with me? Why couldn't I talk? The lieutenant squared the edges of the papers in front of him. A prison is like any institution, Miss Ten Boom. Certain rules, certain way of doing things. But I'm not contagious now. I've been better for weeks and weeks, and my own sister is just so close. Lieutenant Ralms, if I could just see Betsy, if I could just talk with her for a few minutes. He lifted his eyes from the desk, and I saw anguish in them. Miss Ten Boom, it is possible that I appear to you a powerful person. I wear a uniform. I have a certain authority over those under me. But I am in prison, dear lady from Haarlem, a prison stronger than this one. It was the 4th and final hearing, and we had come back into the small hut for the signing of the paper. He gathered up the completed transcript and went out with it, leaving me alone. I was sorry to say goodbye to this man who was struggling so earnestly for truth. The hardest thing for him seemed to be that Christians should suffer. How can you believe in God now? He'd ask. What kind of a God would let that old man die here in Schwenningen? I got up from the chair and held my hands out to the squat little stove. I did not understand either why father had died in such a place. I did not understand a great deal. And suddenly I was thinking of Father's own answer to hard questions. Some knowledge is too heavy. You cannot bear it. Your father will carry it until you are able. Yes, I will tell Lieutenant Ramans about the train case. He always likes stories about father. But when the lieutenant returned to the room, a guard from the women's wing was with him. Prisoner Ten Boom has completed her hearings, he said, and will return to her cell. The young woman snapped to attention. As I stepped through the door, Lieutenant Rams leaned forward. Walk slowly, he said, in corridor F. Walk slowly? What did he mean? The guard strode down the long, door-lined hall so swiftly that I had to trot to keep up with her. Ahead of us, a prison trustee was unlocking the door of a cell. I trailed behind the guard as much as I dared, my heart thumping wildly. It would be Betsy's cell. I just knew it. Then I was abreast of the door. Betsy's back was to the corridor. I could see only the graceful sweat-bone of her chestnut hair. The other women in the cell stared curiously into the corridor. Her head remained bent over something in her lap, but I had seen the home Betsy had made in Schveningen. For unbelievably, against all logic, this cell was charming. My eyes seized only a few details as I inched reluctantly past. The straw pallets were rolled instead of piled in a heap, standing like little pillars along the walls, each with a lady's hat atop of it. A headscarf had somehow been hung along the wall. The contents of several food packages were arranged on a small shelf. I could just hear Betsy saying, "The red biscuit tin, here in the centre." Even the coats hanging on their hooks were part of the welcome of that room, each sleeve draped over the shoulder of the coat next to it like a row of dancing children. I jumped and hurried after my escort. It had been a glimpse only, 2 seconds at the most, but I walked through the corridors of Schveningen with Betsy's singing spirit at my side. All morning I heard doors opening and closing. Now keys rattled outside my own. A very young guard in a very new uniform bounded in. "Prisoners stand at attention," she squeaked. I stared at her wide, blinking eyes. The girl was in mortal fear of something or someone. Then a shadow filled the doorway, and the tallest woman I have ever seen came into my cell. Her features were classically handsome, the face and height of a goddess, but one carved in marble. Not a flicker of feeling registered in her eyes. "No sheets here either, I see," she said in German to the guard. "See that she has 2 by Friday, one to be changed every 2 weeks." The ice-cold eyes appraised me exactly as they had the bed. "How many showers does a prisoner get?" The guard wet her lips. "About 1 a week." 1 a week? 1 shower a month was closer. She will go twice a week. Sheets, regular showers. What conditions going to be better? The new head matron took 2 strides into the cell. She did not need the cot to reach the overhead bulb. Rip. Off came my red cellophane lampshade. She pointed to a box of soda crackers that had come in a second package from Nolly. "No boxes in the cells," cried the little guard in Dutch, as indignantly as though this had been a long-standing rule. Not knowing what else to do, I dumped the crackers out onto the cot. As at the matron's unspoken command, I emptied a bottle of vitamins and a sack of peppermint drops the same way. Unlike the former head matron, who shrieked and scolded endlessly in her rusty hinged voice, this woman worked in a terrifying silence. With a gesture she directed the guard to feel beneath the mattress. My heart wedged in my throat. My precious remaining gospel was hidden there. The guard knelt and ran her hands the length of the cot. But whether she was too nervous to do a thorough job, or whether there was a more mysterious explanation, she straightened up, empty-handed, and then they were gone. I stood gazing numbly at the jumble of food on my cot. I thought of this woman reaching Betsy's cell, reducing it again to 4 walls and a prison cot. A chill wind was blowing through Schveningen, cleaning, ordering, killing. It was this tall, ramrod-straight woman who unlocked the door to my cell one afternoon in the second half of June and admitted Lieutenant Rams. At the severity of his face, I swallowed the greeting that had almost burst from me. "You will come to my office," he said briefly. "The notary has come." We might as well have been total strangers. "Notary?" I said stupidly. "For the reading of your father's will." He made an impatient gesture. Obviously this minor matter had interrupted a busy day. "It's the law. Family present when a will is opened." Already he was heading from the cell and down the corridor. I broke into a clumsy run to keep up with the strides of the silent woman beside me. The law? What law? And since when had the German occupation government concerned itself with Dutch legal procedures? Family? Family present? No, don't let yourself think of it. At the door of the courtyard, the matron turned erect and impassive back along the corridor. I followed Lieutenant Rarms into the dazzling early summer afternoon. He opened the door for me into the 4th. Before my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I was drowning in Willem's embrace. Cora! Cora! Baby sister! It was 50 years since he had called me that. Now Nolly's arm was around me too, the older one still clinging to Betsy as though by the strength of her grip she would hold us together forever. Betsy! Nolly! Willem! I did not know which name to cry first. Teen was in that little room too, and Flip. And another man. When I had time to look, I recognised the Harlem notary who had been called in on the watch shop's few legal consultations. We held each other at arm's length to look. We babbled questions all at once. Betsy was thin and prison pale, but it was Willem who shocked me. His face was gaunt, yellow, and pain-haunted. He had come home this way from Schwenningen, Teen told me. 2 of the 8 men crowded into his tiny cell had died of jaundice while he was there. Willem. I could not bear to see him this way. I crooked my arm through his, standing close so that I did not have to look at him, loving the sound of his deep, rolling voice. Willem did not seem aware of his own illness. His concern was only for Kik. This handsome blonde son had been seized a month before while helping an American parachutist reach the North Sea. They believed he had been on one of the recent prison trains into Germany. As for father, they had learned a few more facts about his last days. He had apparently become ill in his cell and been taken by car to the municipal hospital in The Hague. There no bed had been available. Father had died in a corridor, separated somehow from his records or any clue of his identity. Hospital authorities had buried the unknown old man in the paupers' cemetery. The family believed they had located the particular grave. I glanced over at Lieutenant Rarms. He was standing with his back to us as we talked, staring down at the cold, unlit stove. Swiftly I opened the package that Nolly had pressed into my hand with the first embrace. It was what my leaping heart had told me, a Bible, the entire Bible in a compact volume, tucked inside a small pouch with a string for wearing around the neck, as we had once carried our identity cards. I dropped it quickly over my head and down my back, beneath my blouse. I couldn't even find words with which to thank her. The day before in the Chavalan I had given away my last remaining gospel. We don't know all the details, Willem was saying in a low voice to Betsy. Just that after a few days the soldiers were taken off guard duty at the Beige and police stationed there instead. The 4th night he believed the chief had succeeded in assigning Rolf and another of our group to the same shift. They had found all the Jews well, though cramped and hungry, and seen them to new hiding places. And now, I whispered, they're all right now. Willem lowered his deep sunken eyes to mine. He had never been good at concealing difficult truths. They're all right, Cora, all except Mary. Oh, Mary Atala, he said, had been arrested one day walking down a city street. Where she had been going and why she had exposed herself in this way in broad daylight, nobody knew. The time is up, Lieutenant Rarms left his perusal of the stove and nodded to the notary. Proceed with the reading of the will. It was a brief, informal document. The Beige was to be home for Betsy and me as long as we wanted it. Should there ever be any money realised from the sale of house or watch shop, he knew we would recall his equal love for us all, and he committed us all with joy to the constant care of God. In the silence which followed, we all suddenly bowed our heads. Lord Jesus, Willem said, we praise you for these moments together under the protection of this good man. How can we thank him? We have no power to do him any service. Lord, allow us to share this inheritance from our Father with him as well. Take him too and his family into your constant care. Outside, a God's footsteps sounded on the crunchy gravel walk.